Okay, so something I've been thinking about that I found very interesting is when I look back at history, history always champions individuals, They always champion like Nelson Mandela. He's one of the greatest leaders, led South Africa out of apartheid. Mahatma Gandhi, Stalin, Hitler, even the bad ones. It's always focused on the leader, but no leader exists alone. Like there's always people behind them. There's people that created them. There's people that, help them in their pursuit of power, whether it's for the good or for the bad. Why do you think leaders stand out so much that everybody else gets neglected? And I mean, if I think of the most infamous Hitler, everybody knows Hitler. Nobody knows who his second in command was. Nobody knows where he got his ideas from.
I think for me, it is because the leader is the face of a team, an organization, a country. And I don't discount that there is a lot of people that is working quite hard behind the scenes. But the world is set up in such a way that people choose a leader. They choose somebody to represent them. I think the onus then lies on on the leader to make known who's the team behind them and to expose that team and to not just show up to be the only person that the world knows. Because I think also the risk therein lies that the proper, I call it succession planning and business continuity is not done. So, for instance, if you look in terms of Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela was an absolute amazing, great visionary leader. The question is, did he transfer that knowledge? Did he make sure that the next person that's going to be in line and stepping up is going to be able to be similar to him, address the similar behaviors, do the similar things? Um, or is the leader there to take the glory for themselves? And sometimes it's not even about taking the glory for themselves, but you get people, and we find it a lot in organizations that becomes leaders because they are technically very strong, they're very clever, they're brilliant, but they are not able to take other people with them. They're not able to coach, they're not able to mentor, they're not able to transfer knowledge. So I think some of that is happening, and that's why you find. And then I think the converse, there's different school of thoughts, because I also think that sometimes a leader will be the face of the people and people will know them because they're protecting their teams. So it's not necessarily that they're not wanting their teams to shine or be in the limelight, but a great level of protection. And I was not there in Hitler's time, I can't speak for him. But there may be an element of if something happens, he's the face and people will put a hit on him. They will look for him and not necessarily the other person. Um, and maybe that was part of his way of protecting because the second of command is not known. So both of them won't get hurt.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. And if I think about what you mentioned, having succession planning, something that stands out with leaders also is they are so unique. Like each leader is different. Each person has a unique thought pattern and experiences that have shaped it. So how do you go about, this whole thing of succession planning where you make sure the next leader coming in has a similar mindset despite being a different person, that they will continue that legacy in spite of not being that exact person that was there before.
So, succession planning is, I think, a simple word, but it is a complex thing to do. And it doesn't just start out by saying this is, we need to get somebody. You need to identify and have tools that you're going to use that is going to identify the specific person. So, one, it is, and I'm going to speak from a corporate
Yes.
perspective. If I look in the corporate world, one, the organization need to understand what it is that drives the organization, what is the culture that the organization's got, and also is that the culture that the organization want. Because if there was a leader previously that did not steer the organization well, then it is first about identifying the culture that the organization want, and then the organization then need to say, this is the culture that we want. What's the behavior that the leaders has to portray? When that is identified, I am very for psychometric assessments to then put people through to identify whether the people have got the certain behaviors, the certain skills, and I think most importantly also the worldview. Because a lot of the times the worldview is underestimated. The social norms are underestimated within the world. And it's very important that all of those elements are taken into consideration. Technical skills for me is a given because by the time that you appoint a leader in a very senior role, you expect that they have the qualifications, you expect that they've got the years of experience. But it is important to then assess the behavioral and the cultural elements.
Hmm. And in terms of the cultural elements, what I'm getting is the leader is largely responsible for shaping that culture. How is the leader, responsible for shaping the culture? Is it through his actions, through what he says, through things he tells others to do? Or what exactly do you mean by culture, and what exactly does the leader do to create it?
I think what I mean by culture is the norms, the standards, the behaviors, the things that people do on a daily basis. And those are the things that you see, the things that you feel. So not using, like the pure textbook definition. It is how you show up when you come to work. Things like, for instance, does managers micromanage? Is this a culture where people are rewarded for performance, or is this a culture where people are rewarded for the time that they spend in the office? That creates, the culture, and then that defines certain behaviors. And I think, why there is the old cliche that says leader sets the culture is because for me, it's not about the leader's behavior as such and people seeing it and mimicking
Yeah.
it. One, you do want the leader to walk the walk and talk the talk. But most importantly, it is going to be the behaviors that the leader is either rewarding or punishing. Because some leaders, there's a lot of values that are up on the walls, and people say these are the walls, these are the values that we aspire to, but a lot of it is not translated into what is the behaviors that's required and how do we want you to show up. And then also, those behaviors are not measured anywhere. So there's a performance management process, but a performance management process normally just looks in terms of the technical skills, the financial targets that people need to meet, but no way does it speak to the behavioral elements. There are some best practice companies that are doing that. In those companies, you can really see that they are continuously the top employers, the best companies to work for, and people actually want to go and work for them. People are lining up for it.
Hmm. And what exactly do these companies do that people want to go there? Can you give maybe examples of practices?
I think for me, a word that immediately comes to mind when I think of companies like that is accountability. It is companies that keeps people accountable for what they need to do and how they do it. Those that for me is the one thing that stands out. So they don't tolerate behaviors that is not aligned to their values, and those behaviors are clearly articulated. They also have very intense leadership development training that articulates very clearly to the leaders to say, this is the behaviors that's acceptable, these are the behaviors that are not acceptable. How are you going to inculcate it? How are you going to filter it down to the organization? So for me, those organizations really puts a high premium on accountability.
So why accountability? What exactly about it? Is it that people would feel if I'm held accountable, then everybody else is held accountable? So it gives a combination that your actions have weight, but also that you won't be held liable for other people's actions. Or am I getting it wrong? Is there something else to it?
No, I think organizations that keeps people accountable, together with that, also goes the thing about autonomy. So they give the people the autonomy and then they hold them accountable. And I think for me that is where the big difference comes in. So when people are held accountable, they know that there is either going to be positive or negative consequences.
Yeah.
They know that they can't blame other people. They know that they will be solely held accountable for what they need to achieve and how they're going to achieve it. And I think in organizations where there are a lack of accountability, there's a blame game. It becomes a toxic environment in terms of how competitive people become. You become a doggy dog's world. And the person that can scream the loudest will be the person that gets the limelight.
Yeah. Okay. It sounds also like it's more culture where it's who can do the most, or doing as opposed to showing that you are doing. Because you can create a culture where it's focused on having people be
That is
seen to be
correct.
doing something as opposed to actually getting results, making a difference. Mm. um
That is absolutely correct because you see there are cultures where you've got people that is and I think personality comes in here because you get some people that will quietly do their work and not necessarily tell people this is what I'm doing. And then you will get those people that let other people do the work and then they go tell people that this is what they've done. So that is, the type of stuff that creates either a culture of backbiting, a toxic culture. And if leaders leave that type of behaviors to continue, then they are setting the trend for the culture. As we, when they are addressing the culture and they are putting these behaviors and correcting it, then they are setting the positive culture to say, you know what, we know that you did not do this work, somebody else did it, and we actually do not take kind in you taking the credit for this. That is when you stop it right in its track.
um any advice you would give on like how to create a culture in which people are willing to take accountability for their actions, but also not that scared that they don't come out and say when they did something wrong because of fear of, this is gonna cost them a lot. Because you want people to be able to say, hey, there's this issue, but also, you don't want them to be too scared to come and raise if there is an issue.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. I think the more that you actually show people that when they come forth and they say, you know what, I've made a mistake or this is what was wrong, and you inculcate the culture that says, okay, if this is what went wrong, what is the solution? And you also help the person to come up with a solution. And then to say, how do you correct it? you start inculcating that culture where people know it's okay for me to own up as long as I come and I've got some kind of a solution that I can soundboard with my leader. And yes, it may not be the solution that we're ultimately going to use, but at least the leader can see that there's not just an attitude of apathy that says, I've made a mistake. Now you sort it out. It
Hmm.
is then about, I've made a mistake. This is how I think we can correct it. What is your views around that? And then I think the
Yeah.
onus lies on the leader to allow for that to happen, and also not to then be punitive when the mistake happened. Obviously, when somebody comes the fourth or third time to you with exactly the same mistake, no learning has taken place, then you obviously then going to look at this differently, and then you need to understand, okay, why does this person have a resistance to learning? But I do think that it is doable to create those cultures. And again, I think leadership plays a great role in terms of how they're going to, manage the situation when somebody tells them that there was a mistake that was made.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Taking what you said into account, if I look at, where people would likely see leaders or get exposed to them regularly, even if you're not in corporate or anything, is in sports. And, the leader of any team is the manager. And if I look at different clubs, they each have different managers, they have different approaches. So, in terms of the world of football, Jose Mourinho, like 20 years ago, was one of the most amazing managers. He came in, revolutionized everything, started winning everything. But now, as time has gone on, his sort of approach doesn't seem to work anymore. His leadership style that maybe worked 15 years ago, it's I'm the boss, everybody will do as I say, I set the tactics. It doesn't work anymore. If you look at the more recent managers like Mikel Arteta, it's more empowering the players you have, getting the best out of them, taking young players, nurturing them, creating a system in which they can thrive. So, as you mentioned, that that leaders shape the culture, they create the culture. But if I look at football, it sort of seems like the culture also has an impact on the leader as well. Like a leader needs to be somewhat adaptable because at different times you're going to have different people. Players 15, 20 years ago were different to players now. We live in a different world to way back then. There's different stimuli players are exposed to. Before, players would only find out in the papers, in the newspapers, if they had a poor performance. That would be the only critique they get. But now they get critiqued from every angle. Social media, the moment something happens on the pitch, people are posting about it. As soon as the match is done, people will be lambasting them. So, how adaptable does a leader need to be? Between being having your identity and using that to shape the culture around you versus taking in the culture and being flexible enough to work with that and have influence.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and also a very interesting scenario. I think my view is that leaders, the most successful leaders, are transformational leaders. So transformational leadership is where you can identify and you can see and you can transform accordingly. You can shape yourself in terms of what does this situation or environment require. So I think, yes, you are right. And remember, culture is something that gets influenced bottom up and top down. And sometimes the bottom up is very, very powerful. To the extent that if a new leader comes in and the new leader is not strong, and I normally call it a leader, any leader, it doesn't matter whether it's in corporate, whether it's in sport or anywhere, the leader's got about 90 to 100 days to come and put the stamp. in place.
Yes.
If they were not able to do that, then it's going to be very difficult for that leader to do any change after that. So if you take the scenario about Mourinho, I think generations have changed. How the generations have evolved and what was important for generations, a few years ago versus the new generations that are coming up. There is a significant difference, and you can see it. And I think that the pandemic that we had a few years ago. In the form of COVID must not be underestimated because people are looking for different things, and the way that generations were brought up previously didn't just stem or start in an organization, it started in the home environment where your parents would bring you up in a certain way, and that was, I'm the parent, you listen and you shall do.
Yeah.
Whereas the generations that we are now parenting, we've empowered those generations, we've given them a voice. The schooling system has changed. So the schooling system have taught children that you've got a voice. And there's a lot of laws and things that have changed in this time in terms of the do's and don'ts, in terms of parenting, schooling, etc. So thereby, when people enter the working world, all of those elements is factored into. So it becomes more difficult to lead people in a autocratic type of style, as well as a one size fits all. It's also very important for a leader to be able to understand what makes a person tick and what is it that you can do to drive an individual, because what may motivate you may not necessarily what will motivate me.
Hmm. Yeah, that is exactly true. Like everybody has their own motivations, different inspirations. And also, again, if I look at the world of football, it's always fascinating to look at leadership there. You get players that will thrive in one team, then move to another, and they suddenly struggle and look like a shadow of their former self. And then the moment they move on again, they're back to their previous best. Like Ronaldo, for instance. Before he went to United, he was seen as one of the best forwards in the world. Goes to United, he looks good in his first season, but then a new manager comes in and it's like he's a shadow of himself. He doesn't look like this world class star that everybody once knew. And you could attribute it to age, but then he goes to Saudi Arabia and he suddenly looks like the old him again when he's playing for Portugal. So you can't even say he's playing against um, weaker players. So to me, if I look at that, it looks like it's not only the leader, but also the people under the leader. There has to be a match there as well. So, how do you, as a leader, identify people that align with your values and your views? And if people aren't, aligned with your views, when do you like realize that probably you should go your separate ways, or you look if this person can, you know, join into what you're trying to build as a leader?
I think for me, and maybe I'm not going to go back to the soccer because
Yeah.
I think, I don't really know what their driving forces will be. I think what I can only speak for with this is personal experience. So for me, I've been in many roles where I stepped in as the leader. And very early on, you are able to assess in terms of who's your derailers, who's your supporters, and who's maybe sitting on the fence in terms of looking what is going to happen in which direction they're going to go into. I think some of the things that I found challenging was not in terms of me not identifying who are the derailers. I, you operate in a system,
Yeah.
and sometimes that system keeps you stuck from doing what you really know needs to be done. There are many times when the derailers are very supported by the top leaders within the company, and they've positioned themselves quite well within the organizations, and therefore it becomes very hard for you to do anything in terms of exit conversations, etc. Those people also becomes very dangerous because they are the people that will. There's a nice term that in most organizations I use. They call it black branding. So those people are very proactive to in very early in a leader's career start black branding them with the top leaders, because they do that whilst leaders don't know you, and they then create a perception. And you find that, human behavior, there's a lot of people that still engages with people based on the perceptions of what was created.
Yeah.
So I think in my experience, that is some of the things that I have found of why a leader doesn't make the decisions that needs to be made.
Yeah. So it sounds like a leader also has to be empowered. Like a leader should be trusted that they will make the right decisions. Their judgment has to be trusted. If a leader doesn't have that, where the leader's going to be undermined by, the people that ultimately get the leader in, it's kind of pointless having that leader in the first place. You sort of setting them up for failure.
I would agree with that 100%. So, my view is if a leader is appointed, the leader must be trusted
Yeah.
um, to do the right things, because, a lot of the times leaders goes through very intense recruitment processes,
Yeah.
and you are not just appointed by fluke. So the leader needs to be trusted that they have been appointed to do what is needed
Yeah.
and be allowed to make the decisions. And I think the second element is very important, that top leadership
Yes.
actually make it known that this is the leader that we've appointed. This is the person that we are
Yeah.
supporting, and we trust that this person is going to make the right decisions. If
Yes.
you've got any issues, you are going to address it and you are going to sort it out with that leader. If that can be done, then that leader will feel fully empowered. And you know what that will actually do? I think it will actually also let the derailers come on board very quickly, because nobody wants to lose their jobs. And if they see that there is full support behind the leader, they will come on board.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If I think back to the story of Steve Jobs, actually, it sort of exemplifies it. So with Steve Jobs, when he was initially at Apple, he was like, if you read anything about Steve Jobs, he was a very obsessive and passionate person. And he had like a high standard of quality that he expected everybody to be on, and he had his way of doing things, and nothing else would go. And the shareholders, they didn't like this. They thought he's too much, and they thought they were better off without him, and then got rid of him. And then they got in another leader, and he wasn't able to make Apple what Apple is. You know, the identity of Apple was always to be innovative, have the highest quality possible. And the new leader came in with a different sort of approach and mindset. But he couldn't do what Steve Jobs did. And ultimately, they went back to Steve Jobs and they had to put up with him. And if you look at the fruits that came from it, Apple is just about the biggest tech company in the world right now. And it was all by his obsessive nature, It might not have been what everybody liked, but once they accepted and put faith in him, then he could work his magic. And I think that's the other thing when that I pick up from what you're saying is if a leader has a high standard, if I look at the detractors, there would be people that may not want to be on that high level. They would want to coast through, and I think empowering the leader would be beneficial because you raise the bar Actually, if you raise the bar, there's not everybody that would want that bar to be raised because they may fear, oh, that's too high for me, and it can create problems instead of trying to lift themselves and match it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I must say, personally, I've been at the receiving end of exactly that, I think, many times in my career. I always jokingly tell people, but it's actually not a joke. I think it's very true and very real. I tell people there are two types of people in my teams. Normally, there are those that loves me and those that hates me. And throughout my career, the ones that loves me were the hardworking people. It was people that really didn't mind going the extra mile. They didn't mind, being coached, being mentored. A lot of those people are in executive roles at this stage. And then there were people that was very lazy. And when I look and I reflect back, I can hand on heart say that many of those people, some of them actually highly qualified, and they are still in very administrative type of roles. And it's sad because I'm a leader that loves to coach and mentor. And, I love to see people grow. And when you give people feedback, they're either going to take it and say, how do I grow from this? But you also get people that takes feedback and take it very personal. So they don't see the what that you're addressing. They think that you're addressing them as an individual.
Yeah.
And once people do that, they are not in a growth mindset and they keep themselves stuck from learning and
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah, and I think looking at learning and growing, um, it takes a lot of humility, and also, you also have to have confidence in the leader that you can trust what the leader is saying. How does a leader create that confidence and, create an environment in which, the people under the leader know what I'm saying is for the benefit of them, for the benefit of the company, for the benefit of the team. It's not, to deride you as an individual.
I think the best thing that leaders can do is one to be very transparent in terms of what they're doing, why they're doing it, because that creates trust within teams. And then secondly, to ask for permission to give feedback. When a leader has asked for permission to give feedback to people, the people are more open to receiving the feedback when it is given. And when the leader is asking for the permission for feedback, it's about explaining to say, this is where we are at, this is where we want to go to, this is the style that I've got. Are you open for feedback? And the reason why I'm giving feedback is to allow you to grow. And I think when people are giving feedback, it's not about the what that you always do, it
Yeah.
is about the how. So are you giving it with empathy? Do you give it from a growth mindset, or in what the motivation behind why you're doing and why you're giving the feedback is
Yeah.
important?
Okay. Yeah, and there's a story that comes to mind from the US Navy. So, different ways that a leader could give feedback is not necessarily just by saying it, but also showing it. So, I can't remember exactly what the vision of the Navy it was, but there was sort of this ritual or this understanding that when they go to lunch in the canteen, there would be this long line of all the soldiers standing there, and the captains would just come and they would jump the line because they have authority. They are further along. They're higher ranked. They've done a lot for the country already. They deserve this right to go to the front of the line and get their food. Now, something interesting about this particular part of the Navy is it was regarded as like the worst part of the Navy to work for, despite all their success, despite being so um, well highly regarded. Like if you went there, you were regarded as the best of the best, but nobody wanted to be part of it. And a new captain came in, and he observed what was happening. And what he did is he didn't go and tell the other captains, no, this isn't the way we should be doing things. Instead, what he did is he went and he stood in the back of the line and he spoke with the rookies that were standing there. He spoke with them as if they just, on the same level. Like, if you looked at them talking, you'd not be able to tell this is the highest ranked captain in the division. And in him doing that, all the other captains followed suit. So what other ways do you think a leader can give feedback without actually, you know, making it seem like, because if you tell somebody to do something, people are very put off from it. But when they see, they know, okay, this is what is expected from me and try to live up to it.
Yeah, I think that is so important, for the leader to show, and sometimes, it is more powerful than the words can say. So I think that is one example, and it's not just in the Navy. I think it happens everywhere because in corporates, I can tell you, there's a hierarchy, and people demand to be treated in a certain way. So I think for me, it is about the leader treating everybody the same. And yes, the leader does have and does need to also own the space of, you are on a higher level, because obviously the level of accountability that goes with it needs to be acknowledged. But it doesn't mean that it is from a demand perspective, but more from an accountability
Yeah.
perspective, if that makes any sense. And then I think, it is about first giving people the opportunity
Yeah.
to do the things in terms of how they would do it. Because then you've got the basis to give feedback from instead of, just being bombastic. And I think that is something that I've learned and that I have grown in my leadership, because first you see these things, and because you don't want things to fail, you almost take it from the person that actually needs to do it,
Yeah.
and you run with it because you want it to be perfect the first time. And I've learned that, it doesn't need to be perfect the first time,
Yeah.
because let the person do it,
Yeah.
and then the next time you can say, why don't you try this, why don't you try that, and even showcasing it for them so that they can actually see the difference in terms of how they did it versus how you would like them to do it.
Yeah. It sounds
And
like
then you
also
need to
having
be able to
confidence
show
in
them
people.
the difference in impact.
Yeah.
Correct.
Hmm.
So, some leaders goes with the philosophy of, I don't trust you until you show me. And I think the great leaders goes with the philosophy of, I trust you until you show otherwise.
Yeah. So it sounds like, to be a good leader, you have to be somewhat optimistic.
You have to be optimistic, and you have to believe.
Yeah.
You have to believe, because sometimes things are going to happen. And you know what, for me, I think the philosophy that I've started adopting is, if it's not detrimental to the company, and the company is not going to have huge financial loss, there's not going to be a people risk, in terms of somebody losing their life or something like that,
Yeah.
then allow the person to do.
Yeah.
And if it's a mistake, then yes, on the way you will rectify it.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if I think just in terms of leader having confidence in people and being optimistic, if I look at a lot of leaders, people that follow leaders become leaders in their own right as well. In football, there's tons of managers that have followed suit after Guardiola. If I look in terms of in the world of psychology, Freud, all the people that were under Freud went in, struck out on their own. They have their own um, modalities. Like there's Jung, there's Adler, and then under them, the people under them also went and lead in their own way. So it seems like a leader has to have faith that the people under them are also capable of being leaders as well. So how do you navigate that way?
I think
Yeah.
it's actually not even having faith that the leaders under them must have faith. I think as a
Yeah.
leader, I always strive to appoint people that are better than me, that are cleverer than
Yeah.
me. Um, because a leader is going to know a little bit of everything. And then you need people that actually knows deeply about some subject
Yeah.
matter, you know.
Yeah.
So the greatest leaders is very confident in their abilities and their skills, and therefore they don't need to be insecure
Yes.
when their people are stronger than them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always said, in organizations, when I create strong leaders, that if I can go on leave and I'm away for a week
Yeah.
and nobody is going to phone me or have a need for me, that is when you know you've done something amazing,
Yeah.
because the world is able to to go on without you.
So you're saying the mark of a good leader would be that a good leader can make themselves, in a sense, obsolete. So they would only step in to make the major
That
choices and decisions, but then, you know, everybody else should be able to do things on their own.
That is correct, and unfortunately, there are not many of those leaders because a lot of people have got I call it the lack of mindset,
Yeah.
that I need to be the person and everybody must be dependent on me.
Yeah.
Whereas I think my school of thought is abundance. There's enough
Yes.
for all of us. And if it's time for me to move on to something else to allow somebody to service through,
Yeah.
I can even, go sideways in the organization and do something else.
Yes.
And I think, in the new world of work, that is actually where organizations needs to go to. And I mean, you love the soccer
Yeah.
analogy, so it goes for that as well.
Yeah.
If you look in terms of the situation of Ronaldo, I think Ronaldo reached a stage at some point where he was insecure that if he coach and train somebody, they're going to be better than him. And, not even realizing in that lies your legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually interesting because, like, if I think no manager is regarded as great just because of the managers themselves, it's because of the players they raised up. And similar with players, if you look at um, players at, like, in terms of Ronaldo, now you see all the players being inspired by him coming through. So there's Mbappe that had pictures of him all over the wall. There's Erling Haaland that tries and play just like him. That's like an extension of your legacy. Even when you're not around, your name is still there just by that very image still being present.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is really absolutely amazing. I started a new job recently,
Yeah.
and one of my HR managers, when she was introduced to me, and then she says, I know a person that worked with you, and oh my God, she said, we're going to love you. If you look at that, and then I said, so who was that? And when she said the person's name, you know,
Yeah.
I felt proud because, that is a person that I have not seen for over
Yeah.
probably 18 years.
Yeah.
And yet, this person still remembers me. She remembers the impact that I had on her and how I made her feel. And I think that is what leaders needs to inculcate.
Yeah. And it seems like also, in spite of just being a leader, it's reputation that follows you further than you would imagine. You know, what you do today, you might think doesn't have an impact, but you see, like, years down the line, it still resonates with people. People still remember it. And if people remember it, they would, transfer it to others. They would tell others, this is what you were like. And then people have already, even if they've never met you, they have a favorable image of you already. They already know this is what I should expect. This is who Bedelia is, you know. So, in terms of
That is
that,
true.
yeah, yeah. So, in terms of that, having reputation and that your reputation follows you, it would also make it more important, to do things that align with your values and not going against your own values. So, if I look at a bunch of case studies where, in terms of whistleblowers, when they did that, it was to great detriment of their own, lives. How does somebody retain their own integrity in situations like that without, throwing everything out the window for themselves, putting them on self at jeopardy? Do you have anything that you think somebody could do, or yeah, how would you navigate such a situation if you found yourself in a place where you had to do or are expected to do something that it goes against who you are, your own beliefs?
I think I've been in a few of those situations, and I think for me, you've mentioned it. It's about staying true to yourself. It's about you know living up to your values, because in the end of the day, I don't work for an organization. I don't work for a person. I do work for a higher power,
Yeah.
and that is who I want to satisfy every day, and who ultimately, I do everything for. So for me, it's about doing the right thing, because it is the right thing to
Yeah.
do. Based on that perspective. So I've been in situations where I needed to make those bold calls.
Yeah.
And I'm also the type of person that doesn't really do things from an anonymous perspective.
Yeah.
So I think, I have shown a lot of bravery and courage in my career. And yes, it did not steer me well.
Yeah.
There was occasions where I was targeted, and for me, if I would do it over again, I will do it, because it's easy to show apathy, it's
Yeah.
easy to keep quiet. I've seen a lot of people who keep quiet, and I've also seen them progress in life. I've seen them get bigger roles, and the competence levels was not necessarily greater than mine. But if I look at it, I think there's a big price that they've paid in terms of how they feel about themselves every day, and how they must look themselves in the mirror every day
Yeah.
and know what they are doing. So for me, I stand strong in my values. I
Yeah.
encourage it with those that I work with, and if that means that I need to walk away from an organization, I've done that.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like the approach you do that used is look at the cost you are willing to pay, because either decision you're making a cost. It's just whether it's a cost you're going to be happy with now and would keep you going for now. But then when you look back on it, you know, you're not going to look back on it favorably. You might regret it. And sure, you might get ahead now, but once you leave that company, you're going to be irrelevant to a company, most likely. Nobody's going to think about you anymore. Like, you only there for now, and they only care about you in that moment. Where when you look back on your life and you look at the decisions you made, you'd actually be proud. So then, that's a net positive, but it's displaced from you down the line. So you might not feel it now, but then it feels a lot better. Um, so in terms of leaders, who were your role models? Like, what leaders did you look up to? What leaders do you try and mold yourself after?
Hmm, that one needs a bit of thought. um, so I think, if I look at direct leaders to
Mhm.
me, and this is going to sound probably as a female, not the greatest, but my greatest leaders that I've looked up to was male leaders. And I think for me, they provided me the environment to be who I am, and they didn't have any insecurities. The the leaders that I found the most challenging was a lot of female leaders. And I think it was a lot of the female leaders being insecure and then not empowering me to a great extent. And I call it push me into my corner
Yeah.
and not letting me flourish in terms of who I am. So for me, I think in my career that has been quite a big one. In terms of world leaders, I do look at Nelson Mandela, and he has been, somebody I think that has shaped some of my empathy levels. He's very composed. In terms of how he does, I think he's got the best poker face ever. So it's not always able to
Yeah.
read, what he's thinking or feeling, and he's able to keep it
Um,
very
what
composed.
exactly about the poker
And then
face is it that that you would admire about him?
I I think it's that about, what people probably at some stage of his life made him very angry.
Yeah.
And he was able to contain it. And his response, you would never say that, he had any negative emotion, because when he spoke, it was always very composed and very calculated.
Yeah. Okay. Any others?
And then, some other leaders that I absolutely love is people like Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it is the honesty with which they come into the world. I mean, they
Yeah.
don't always do the things right, but they are honest in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Elon Musk actually is an
And
interesting
and
one.
people loves
Yeah.
them because they're transparent.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, he's actually interesting one because on Twitter, like if you follow him, he'll say anything. Like he'll say the dumbest things. Like you wouldn't say this is the CEO of, or yeah, CEO of Tesla, the owner of Twitter as well. You wouldn't say he's the top of the top in it. He looks like he's just some random guy making jokes half of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just looking at those three examples, Nelson Mandela, Richard Branson, and Elon Musk, all of them were also very ambitious from a young age, like, and followed through on everything they said. So Nelson Mandela, his vision was always, the end of apartheid, and he would lead the country. Elon Musk, long before he's known as Elon Musk now, 20 years ago when he was still at PayPal, he was telling people he's going to make the rockets that's going to go into space. He's going to be leading the mission to Mars, like he's going to get people to Mars. Um, he's going to have the most successful car company. He's going to have the first electronic car. And he was saying this like 20 years ago before it was even a thought like in the public mind space. And a lot of people thought he was maybe delusional having such grand ambitions all scattered everywhere. And now he's doing all of it, and it's Like anybody that didn't believe him seems kind of foolish now. So, what do you think it is about leaders
And
that
I
gives them
think,
this obsession to do great things?
you know what, I think it's about that. There is something that I don't know how to name it, but it is the drive. It is
Yeah.
the drive to be more, to do more. And if you look at a lot of those leaders, they didn't have, a lucrative upbringing. So I think it is, that X factor about the drive of wanting to do, wanting to be, and then also not having fear to do,
Yeah.
and not worrying what the world says, because a lot of times we are indoctrinated, by a school system or whatever that teaches you, that you can't do something, and a lot of those leaders actually shows you that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything seems impossible until it's done
But
once. Yeah.
yeah, before we move on, I think, from the leaders that shaped, and that I admire.
Yeah.
I think there are some unsung heroes in this world that we don't look at or recognize. And I think for me, my mother is a leader. She's an unsung hero. A lot of who I am, has been shaped by her. If I just look at how she runs a household, the values that she's inculcated. Um, when we talk about values and standing strong with your values comes from your home environment.
Yeah.
So I think for me, my mom is really somebody that have taught me the principles of, consistency. Giving everybody equal rights.
Yeah.
That was even before, South Africa's democracy and things comes out like that.
Yes.
She's taught me that, what, it doesn't mean that you live in this community that you can't be something more and do something more. And it doesn't mean that we don't have all the money, that you are a nobody. I've always felt like the most beautiful, the most, rich, person in our community, and
Yeah.
that is how my mother made me feel.
Okay, that's really sweet. Yeah, and even if I'm just listening there, that's also, if I look at it as, a sign of ambition. Like people always think ambition has to be this grand vision of something, like you're going to go change the world, you're going to go make the biggest building or whatever. But ambition is also, if I look at in terms of being a parent, being the best possible parent you can, trying to, you know, create the best environment for your kids, um, trying to help them be the best. A leader doesn't always have to think about themselves being the one doing the great things. It's also inspiring others to become those people that go and achieve, that go and do the wonders in the world, you know. And, if I look at the leaders you've mentioned, what are the qualities that you've found yourself embodying of them? And what are qualities that you think you'd still have work to do on to become more like them? Yeah.
Ah, such an interesting one.
Yeah.
I think some of my qualities surpasses some of these.
Yeah.
But I think I think, the drive, the ambition, um, is definitely there. The willingness to, and the thing about, you can go beyond yourself.
Yeah.
I think, I've surpassed, some of those. I think some of the things that I still need to, develop is is the courage to just do.
Mhm.
Um, And when I say the courage to just do, is I've got a very high sense of responsibility and I
Yeah.
put a lot of people first. And if you look at what they have done most of their lives, is they've actually just taken the chances without really thinking of themselves or anybody
Yeah.
else. And they've plunged in where I will consider quite a lot of factors. And I think, I will default to the safe side.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that is definitely something that I can still take from them. And yeah, sometimes it's not that easy.
Yeah. There's an author, Morgan Housel. One of the ideas he mentioned, he's when he looked at like the most successful people, he says the thing that separates a lot of people is their speed that they work with. Like the moment they think of an idea, they run away with it and try and make it happen. So yeah, I definitely see, you know, what you're saying in that quote. Um, yeah, and before we end, I'd just like to ask for, is there a question that you use as like a guiding question? So if I look at an example would be like Elon Musk, he says one of the questions he would wake up and ask himself is, what great thing can I do today? And that's like his guiding principle. Steve Jobs, it was, what can I do today to make better products? What is a guiding question that you use on a day to day basis?
When you say their guiding questions, it sounds very much go and
Yeah.
get. And I think it comes back to what I said, some of the weakness in me is because my guiding question is always what's the unintended consequences, which I think is more, you know, a mindset that I probably need to change.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you think it needs to change?
Because by having that as, I think, I always say, what's the unintended
Yeah.
consequences? It may keep you stuck in not doing because then you are thinking what's the
Yeah.
consequences, um, rather than focusing on what's the things that can go well.
Okay. Yeah, that
Because
is.
consequences almost have a negative connotation.
Yeah, because you're constantly looking out for that. You're looking out for Murphy's Law, where can she its head? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any potential questions that you think you could use in place of it?
Let me think about that one.
Okay.
How can I put a spark of magic on my path today?
How can I put a spark of magic on my path today? That's a much more optimistic one, and it sounds very lovely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because also it's more on your autonomy. What can you do, as opposed to what are the unintended consequences? What can happen despite my actions? Yeah. So it's a nice question.
It brings it more internally
Okay.
focused.
Yeah. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for the conversation today. There's a lot that I personally took out of it, and I hope it's a lot that anybody listening to this can take out of it in terms of leadership, different leaders, what it takes to be a leader, how you can empower the leaders around you, and how you can just make the world a better place by being a leader. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, and thank you for the
Bye.
invitation to join
Bye.
you.
Thanks. And there we are done.